This presentation is about 7 sources of cash for your business to start, grow, and survive. So, for most of us, when we're a small business just starting out and we realize that we need some capital for our business, the first place that we tend to look is the neighborhood bank where we've had our personal savings and checking for the last 5 or 10 years. So, that seems like the obvious first choice, but in reality, for most of us, this might be the last place that's actually going to be able to give our small business a loan, especially if we're just starting out. The benefit of working with your neighborhood bank, or what we would call in particular a community bank versus a large national bank, is you're going to be able to develop a relationship with a business banker. So, this is someone that can advocate for you, help you understand the full view of what it is that you're trying to do, someone that you can go to in the long run for future funding and financing. So, whether you're trying to get a business loan or some kind of a line or credit, working with your neighborhood bank is where you're going to have really the best rates and terms. So, this should be the first choice that you turn to oftentimes if you're just trying to get some kind of a loan, if you're able to get this kind of a loan. So, what they're looking at though is they're looking at your business performance and your assets. So, if you're trying to borrow money for something that does not have an asset that can back up as collateral, so you're not trying to buy real estate or a business or a vehicle, it's going to be harder for a bank to give you a loan because they want to lend against those assets. They also are limited to only being allowed to lend to people that have positive business performance. So they need to be able to show that you are generating enough a profit from the business to service the loan. So if they can't show that, you're not going to be able to get the loan. Typically you're talking about borrowing slightly larger amounts of money from the bank. So $50,000 to $100,000 or more makes sense for them. It is often the same amount of work for a banker to write a loan for $20,000 as it is for $200,000. So they're mostly interested in working with you on larger loans. They're going to almost always require, as part of your business performance, that you have been in business for 3 years or more. That shows a history and a track record. And you're going to have to almost always have a personal guarantee. So you will personally be on the hook for that loan, whether if the business cannot service the loan. Some of us are in certain kinds of businesses where we cannot get a bank loan. Perhaps we're in the food service or hospitality industry. We have a food truck dream that we want to have, and we are not going to get a loan from a bank to purchase a food truck. There's lots of other reasons why we might not be lendable to our neighborhood bank, which I already touched on. So in those cases, what we need to do is take a look at the microloan options that might be available to us, especially in Central Ohio. So a microloan is typically available where you are not able to get a bank loan. In fact, in some cases, you will need to show that you have tried to get a bank loan and were unable to get a bank loan. It's still going to require that you have assets and collateral. You're still going to have a personal responsibility, to repay this loan. And you're going to have higher interest and fees potentially. You might be paying 8 to 12% interest on this loan versus a much lower rate with a bank loan. But a microlender is typically going to be able to lend you anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000. In some cases, they have programs that could go to several $100,000. But a lot of times, we're talking about smaller loans to help your business get going. But they have a lot more flexibility than a bank does. So they can look at things that the bank might not be able to look at. They could count certain things, personal assets of yours, as collateral that a bank would not be allowed to use as collateral. They could be more flexible in the number of years you've been in business, especially if you have a history and a track record of performing in that industry. So if you have worked in as a chef or a manager of a restaurant for 10 years, they might not require that you have actually had your restaurant business for 3 years. They might lend to you as a new startup. But you're still going to have a personal guarantee. So if the business does not repay the loan, you'll still be on the hook from it. So oftentimes the sources of these funds for microloans, they come from the city or a county or a nonprofit or the Small Business Administration. There are these entities that will allocate funds to a micro lender for them to use to lend out these smaller loans to startups and small businesses that can't get an ordinary bank loan. The third source of funding that we can access is just a personal loan. So many of us are homeowners or we have personal credit, and we could look at a personal loan. It might be the only option that's available to us. So what we're talking about here is getting a home equity loan, a second mortgage, or a personal line of credit. This is really just going to be a loan between you and the lender personally. So with this kind of loan, you could potentially have very low fees and rates. If you're going out right now to get a home equity loan, you might only pay 2 or 3% for a home equity loan. And it's something that's going to happen very quickly for you. You're probably borrowing somewhere between $5,000 and $50,000. Your years in business is not applicable at all because this is just a personal loan, has absolutely nothing to do with your business. But you're obviously going to still have a personal guarantee. So if the loan is something you're not able to repay because the business isn't successful, you're still going to be on the hook for the money. The fourth source of funding that I like to talk about is venture capital. And every year I meet with a handful of businesses that are planning a startup. They have a great idea. And what they're really looking for is someone that could write them a check for $500,000 to $1 million and just let them go and build this great company. They have this amazing idea. They know exactly what to do to grow this into a successful business. They just need this money and they can go off on their own and build this great company. But unfortunately, that is not how it works when you get venture capital or seed investment. So what we're talking about is getting people to put money, make an investment in your business. So this isn't a loan. This is not something that you're going to repay. But the idea is that you'll produce a return on investment for the shareholder, for the investor. So what they're going to be looking for is they're going to look at the product that you have. They're going to look at what kind of validation you have that customers will actually want to buy this product. Almost just as important, they're going to look at the team. What is your track record as a business person of you and your team in going out and growing a successful company? That's going to be very important for them to look at. And obviously, they're looking at the growth potential. So these are investors are usually looking for a company that could potentially grow to 50 million in revenue in just a handful of years. Really could just take off like a rocket. They realize that most of their investments aren't going to do that. Most are going to die, but they want to look for companies that have that potential. So in Columbus, it's very different maybe than other parts of the country. Typically, when you have a business in Columbus that does not yet have customers, so you're looking for seed investment, you don't have any revenue or you have just a very small amount of revenue, you're going to be lucky to get $50,000 to $100,000 of seed investment in your business. And you can literally probably count on around a dozen, maybe slightly more than that, businesses in Central Ohio every year that actually get that kind of investment. So it's very competitive. They're very selective of who those investments go to. Now, you're not going to have to make a personal guarantee, so that's an advantage of this kind of investment. But there's still a cost to this. So even though you're not repaying this, you're getting this investment. First of all, you're giving up equity in your company, and probably a lot more equity than you think you're going to have to give up. Second thing is you're going to give up control of your company when you take on investors. So as your business grows and you take on more and more investment, your ownership position in the business will become diluted and diluted. You, as the CEO of the company, will actually report to the board of directors. So the board is your boss. They literally have the ability to fire you as the CEO of the company. So that will be part of the investment paperwork, is that you have this board. So it happens, from time to time. We see a CEO of a company is pushed out by their board because they don't think they're doing an effective job growing the company. The third thing that it's going to cost you is your time. So when you receive investment, especially seed investment, where your $50,000 to $100,000 investment is not going to last you very long at all, you are putting yourself on a pathway where you are going to have to spend a large amount of your time as the CEO seeking additional rounds of investment, more capital for your business. So you're going to spend a good chunk of your day, every single day, going out, raising additional money for your business, instead of putting that time and effort into growing a great product, nurturing your team and your idea. So it's going to cost you in some way or the other. So a lot of times people aren't necessarily thinking about some of those aspects of getting money from investors. So the fifth source of funding that we'll talk about briefly is crowdfunding. So crowdfunding is obviously where through some social media network, your idea is promoted. People are able to contribute money to your idea. And for the most part, this is not a reliable way for people to raise money for their business, especially if they don't have a unique and compelling product that they can offer as sort of a reward for participating in the crowdfunding idea. So there's several different funding platforms we can use for our crowdfunding campaign, but really these are based on your ability to tell your story, and reach an audience. So there's a cost for you to be able to do this. So there's time invested in creating a really good quality crowdfunding campaign. Potentially you're giving up some kind of reward. Maybe people are actually just pre-purchasing a great product. You have all these campaign costs that you're going to have to execute this. And the typical crowdfunding amount of money that is raised is actually $10,000 is really the more typical amount. So the idea that you're going to potentially raise millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars for most people is not realistic. On the plus side, you don't have to have any years in business. You could be pre-revenue. As long as you can tell a great story and you have something that get people excited about, you might be able to raise some money. But you need to also be aware that there are tax and legal consequences to your crowdfunding campaign. So different monies that you received is likely going to have tax consequences, and you should seek legal counsel before executing a crowdfunding campaign as well. So the sixth source of funding that we'll talk about are what we call asset lenders. So as the name would imply, these are companies that will lend you money based on certain assets that you have in the business that they can use as collateral. So it's a loan that is secured by a specific piece of collateral. Oftentimes, these are customer receivables or potentially even purchase orders that you have with a new supplier. But receivables would be one of the strongest source of asset-based lending that you might be able to have access to. So you have customers that have owe you all kinds of money. You're collecting on that money frequently, but at any given point in time, maybe you have $20, $50, $100,000 or more of receivables. You can actually leverage that as an asset and borrow money against it and then repay that loan once you've collected the receivable. So there are fees, of course, and interest associated with this. And there's lots of different companies that do this type of asset-based lending. So it's important to really consider who your choices are and understand what it is that you're getting into. The amount that you borrow or get is obviously going to be dependent on what you have as collateral. So in the case of receivable financing, it's going to be based on the outstanding invoices that are owed to you. Your years of business, it might not be quite as important, but there definitely needs to be a track record of that customer paying on their invoices. So your personal credit is not necessarily a factor in terms of your ability to get the loan, but it may be a factor in them deciding whether they want to have you as a client. But they're not necessarily going to ask you to make a personal guarantee because the receivable itself is really what is the asset that is acting as collateral. So the best thing to do if you're considering asset-based lending is to explore who the different options are. Typically, you're going to be better off if you can build a relationship with an asset-based lender that gives you some flexibility in terms of how you have to borrow against your receivables. So some receivable lenders might require you to borrow money on all of the receivables that you have going out. Some might let you just pick and choose which receivables you want to take in advance for and how long you want to borrow that money for, so you could pay it off early if you don't need it. So this all comes down to building a relationship with the asset-based lender because ultimately they're really lending that money based on your customers. The seventh source of funding that I'll talk about that you can use to access for your business is to get money from your retirement funds. And there's several different ways that you can do this, some of which have a range of tax consequences for you. So what I'm not advocating here, what hardly ever makes sense, is to do a distribution from your retirement plan. Typically, when you do a distribution from your retirement plan, that is fully taxable income to you personally. You also typically have to pay a 10% early withdrawal fee. So we almost would never suggest that you do a distribution from your retirement and just pull that money out. What we're talking about instead, I'll just highlight quickly 3 different programs that you might be able to take advantage of to get money from your retirement plan. So the first is if you have a 401k, you may be able to borrow money, take a loan from yourself against your own 401k. And typically you're allowed to borrow about half up to $50,000 from your 401k. You can use it for anything you want, a kitchen remodel or to start your business. If you don't have a 401k, but you have a small business and you have no employees, you can potentially set up a solo 401k and still do that same kind of loan. If you're able to roll over $100,000 into a solo 401k, you could potentially borrow $50,000 of that, pay yourself back at a very fair interest rate over 5 years. There is a plan called a self-directed IRA. So depending on what you're trying to make an investment in and borrow money for, you could create a self-directed IRA, and that self-directed IRA can make certain kinds of investments. So for instance, if you are considering going out and buying a piece of residential real estate that you want to rent out as a landlord, maybe you have this opportunity to buy a double or a 4-unit apartment building, you could potentially set up a self-directed IRA, roll your money into that self-directed IRA, and use that to pay for the piece of property. The third kind of retirement funding that I'll just touch on briefly is called a ROBS. I believe it stands for Rollover as Business Startup. This is a much more complicated financial tool, but essentially it allows you to set up what's called a C corporation, and you become an employee of that C corporation. The C corporation creates a 401k retirement plan, and you as an employee have a participation in that 401k retirement plan. You take money from your other retirement funds and roll that over into your new 401k plan that is part of this C corporation that you started. And you decide that the money that you have in your 401k plan, you choose to invest that into your own C corporation. By doing that, you're essentially moving that money then to be cash in your C corporation that your C corporation can now use for whatever business purpose that it sees fit. And then the profit from your business would then be paid as a return to the shareholder, in this case, your 401k plan. So it gets very complicated. There's quite a few fees associated with doing this, both to set up the ROBS, manage your 401k plan annually. It's thousands of dollars a year in fees and services. And about $5,000 to set this up in the first place. So it's really probably only going to make sense if you have a couple $100,000 or more in your retirement plan that you want to go about doing this. But and with all these things, there's rules and complexity. If you aren't careful in how you do it, you might trigger a distribution. And the amount that you can access or borrow is going to vary based on which of these options you pursue and how much money, of course, you have in your retirement plan. But the fees and interest could be very low because you're basically borrowing this money from yourself. But there's also opportunity costs. So if you take money out of your retirement and you put it into your business and your business fails, you've lost your retirement money. So or if you pull this money out and you instead could have left it in the stock market and that doubled over the next 10 years, then you would lose out on the opportunity costs, especially if your business didn't do as well. So there's a lot of complexity, a lot of rules. You definitely need to speak with a CPA to go over any of these kinds of strategies and make sure you have a clear roadmap and understand the pros and cons. So this presentation is really about 7 strategies for your business, but I'm going to throw in this 8th strategy. And this is very important as a small business owner to understand what your options are when it comes to borrowing money from Uncle Sam, from the IRS. And this might sound very odd that you could borrow money from the IRS, and it's not something that we would typically suggest that you do, but there is an option here for you to be able to do this. So when it comes to borrowing money from the IRS, here's what this looks like. The IRS, if you don't have enough money to pay your taxes, they will potentially enter into an installment agreement with you. This is just a payment plan for your taxes. So it's going to be based on how much you owe the IRS. But if you owe, $10,000, $20,000, $40,000 to the IRS, you don't have that money, you can enter an IRS installment agreement. So you maybe potentially could even do up to $100,000 of back taxes that you owe to the government and potentially have payment terms, I believe, up to 8 years. Now, the benefit of this is that the fees are very low and the interest might only be between 6 and 8% on this loan. So where this could be a useful tool is if you feel like you have no choice but to pay your taxes with a cash advance on your credit card that's 20 or 30% interest, that is not the only choice that you have. You could actually do an installment plan with the IRS and pay just 6 to 8% on that installment agreement. Of course, you're going to still have a personal guarantee. There is no way that you get out of paying these taxes to the IRS. They're going to get their money. But this could be an option that you have as a business owner for paying your taxes. So lastly, how can you get help? So the first thing we would like to encourage every business to do is to build a relationship with your business banker. Ideally, this is a business banker that is with a community bank, someone that you can, meet with at least once a year. They understand what's going on with your business. They understand your banking needs, your funding needs. They understand kind of where you're at with your business, and they can be an advocate for you. This was especially important in 2020 when the government rolled out the PPP loan program. There are many small businesses that did not have a relationship with a business banker, and this kept them from being able to quickly apply for a PPP loan because all of those loans were done through banks. So if you had a relationship with a business banker, you had someone you could call, you could ask questions for, and get some help navigating this PPP loan process. If you did not have that kind of banking relationship, maybe you only had a personal checking account that you're using for your business, or maybe you worked with a very large bank where you were just told to go to an online portal, put in your information, and wait to hear back, and you didn't have that personal connection with a community bank, then you were really at a disadvantage in getting those funds. You also have to realize that every bank has its sweet spot, okay? So there are certain industries that certain banks will not lend money for, or they just are not interested right now in making more loans to that type of industry. So maybe they have already made a lot of loans over the last several years to a certain segment of the industry, and they just are not interested in making more loans into that industry. So you have to realize that they have their sweet spot. Certain banks like to only make certain kinds of loans. So the Small Business Administration has a loan product called a 7A loan, and there's certain banks that really only like to do these 7A loans. That's their sweet spot. There's other banks that really only like to make loans, traditional, commercial mortgages for real estate. That's their sweet spot. So we have to understand which banks maybe are our best opportunity based on what it is that we're trying to get money for. The next thing I'd like to suggest everybody does is take advantage of free support and classes with the Small Business Development Center. There are small business development centers around the state of Ohio, and you can take these free classes. You can meet with an advisor. So it may not be a quick process. Typically, before you can see an advisor, you might have to take a series of classes first. So it might not be a quick process, but you'll learn a lot and get a lot of great resources and help. And the last thing that I'll suggest is Cultivate offers a free advisory session. So if you want to do a free discovery call, we usually do this over the phone or Zoom. You can set that up with us, and we'll just kind of step through kind of where you're at with your business and try and get you pointed in the right direction.